welcome to Unreligiously. My name is Lauren, and today we are going to be doing another book review, and this time it is a bestseller. It is Girl, Wash Your Face. Christian conservative author Rachel Hollis has a ton of controversy around her, and I may make a video talking about that controversy on another day, but today we are just going to go through her book, Girl, Wash Your Face, which is printed by a Christian publisher. It is very heavily influenced by the Christian perspective, but she does take efforts throughout the book to encourage people coming from other backgrounds to still take the advice that she has, and kind of explains why you would want to take that advice even if you're not coming from a Christian perspective. The book was overall a mixture of self-help, psychology, memoir, and religious instruction. It blended a lot of different things. The book is broken down into different lies that women believe, different lies that you might believe about yourself. But the lies let me look at my list here. The lies kind of go from things that could generally affect everyone, like the first lie they cover is something else will make me happy. And that's something that you can see, anybody from any walk of life, any religion, any faith, they can probably relate to that. The feeling of waiting for something more, the next job promotion, the next time you make more money, the next relationship, whatever it might be. That's something that everybody can relate to. And then lie 2 is similarly very relatable. It's I'll start tomorrow, so it talks about starting today. Lie 3 is I'm not good enough, which again, pretty relatable. Lie 4 is I'm better than you. Lie 6 is loving him is enough for me, which kind of starts to get into territory that feels a lot more like a memoir. She talks a lot about her own personal journey throughout this, and it starts to feel very unrelatable, at least for me, through these sections, and I'll get into it a little bit more later as I do break down each lie. The next lie is no is a final answer. I don't really like that one for obvious reasons. I don't like that she's framing no is a final answer as a lie, and it also feels a lot more like self-help, because here she starts talking about not taking no for an answer in a business context or when you really want to go after something. And then lie number 7 is you're bad at sex, which kind of veers away from the self-help devotional kind of thing back into a memoir and just personal anecdote type of territory. Lie number 8 is I don't know how to be a mom, which once again, it goes back into self-help, but it feels like, at least for me, it feels unrelatable because I'm not a mom. And so obviously if you're a mom reading this, you probably would be able to relate to that section a little bit better, but it feels thrown in randomly among all of these other things, like talking about sex, talking about not judging other people. It just feels like we're kind of covering every possible content area that she could think of, if that makes sense. Like, this really could have been broken into multiple different books, and sure, parenting could be one of those sections, but it just feels like anybody that reads this is not going to be able to relate to all of it, most likely. So lie number 8 and 9 are basically the same thing. Lie number 8, like I said, I don't know how to be a mom. Lie number 9 is I'm not a good mom. To me, those go really hand in hand, but then we get to lie 10, which is I should be further along by now. This gets back into kind of psychology, self-help, life progression, life coaching type of tips. And then lie 11, other people's kids are so much better. Lie 12, I need to make myself smaller. Lie 13, I'm going to marry Matt Damon. You can see how, these aren't just punchy titles. They're true to what the chapter is about, and it just is kind of all over the place, but I'll keep going. Lie 14 is I'm not a good writer. So that one goes into, that's the one where I was like, oh my god, what am I reading? Because some of these feel so personal. I understand using anecdotes and going like, maybe for you it's I'm not a good writer, maybe for me it's I'm not a good I don't really consider myself, I know that's dumb, but I only started doing YouTube 6 months ago, but like maybe for me, in the context of this video, it would be like, I'm not a good YouTuber. I understand that you can make the application, but it just is so full of her own personal anecdotes that it feels kind of not relatable. Then it's, I will never get past this, I can't tell the truth, I am defined by my weight, I need a drink, there's only one right way to be, and I need a hero. So once again, I know that I just kind of talked you through these and read all of these, but while I was reading this book, I was kind of surprised about how clunky the reading experience was for me. I know it's a bestseller. I know a lot of people love this book, even people that aren't religious and don't come from the same background as Rachel Hollis. But it just, like I said, it feels very clunky. You kind of get one version where, like, the first chapter of this book, I'll just get started, I guess, is the introduction. And in the introduction, I'll talk about some of the key talking points that they go through. The first point in the introduction is that there is this idea that Christian women believe lies from the world. She lists things like being a bad mom, that you're not enough, that you're not a good wife, and then as these lies being from the devil. She talks about how she really likes doing lifestyle content to inspire her audience about how to live, and when women ask her how she's so perfect, she always will respond to them saying how beautiful they are and incredible they're doing. To me, this just isn't, I know I'm going to come across very negative here and like too much of a realist in probably in a negative way, not a positive way. If people are coming to her and asking her, how are you even making this possible? Because I don't feel like a good mom and I'm not making this happen. It can be a little bit disingenuous to just say, you're rocking it, mama, like fed is, like not talking about the breastfeeding conversation, but just like if there's food on the table, then all I see is happy kids. That's not all that there is to raising kids. There is more around that. And I don't think that being able to just be super overly positive and tell everyone they're rocking it just by the fact that they're doing it, that's not true. And especially for the women that are reaching out for help, for legitimate advice, I think that it's a little bit demeaning. If you've ever reached out for help from somebody and then they're like, no, you're doing great, like you're doing so awesome, and you're like, I'm literally not, but you don't want to come across as negative then, so you just kind of take it. That's what I feel like she does in the introduction of this book, is just kind of saying like, everybody's doing awesome and I love inspiring people with my recipes to be better moms. Then she talks about things that are like natural, that she's not perfect, like yelling at your husband. This I didn't like, because she talks about, literally she uses the word screaming. She lists screaming at your husband as being a mistake that happens, a mistake you make, and I would frame that more as emotional abuse or verbal abuse. I have never screamed at my fiance. My fiance has never screamed at me. In relationships that I have been in where somebody screams, which again has not been me because I would consider it abuse, it's been a terrible relationship. I don't think that, especially for somebody like Rachel Hollis, who is a stay-at-home mom. In many respects, they do seem to outsource for help, but she is a stay-at-home mom. She's around her kids a lot, and screaming at them just seems like that's an unfortunate environment for them to have to be in all the time. And this is something that's also very normalized in Christian cultures, because you are told to stay home with your kids and have a million children before you are ready, before you've become emotionally ready to have kids, or even before you've processed your own emotions. And so parents can have a hard time with regulating their emotions, and it is very normal for parents to scream at their kids. And so she goes and normalizes this in the introduction, talking about how she's screamed at her kids and she's screamed at her husband. And I just want to say, I don't think that we should normalize that. I think that that's really negative. I think it's wrong, and I think that it is abusive. Then there's this concept of becoming who you're meant to be, which is a line of thinking that I kind of also disagree with. I don't think that there's this end point of us being who we're meant to be, even if that is being who we're meant to be in Christ. That doesn't happen until you die and go to heaven. So I think it's a lot more about accepting yourself how you are now, trying to become a better person, yes, of course, but I don't think that you should be constantly trying to seek out different flaws of yours and constantly be running yourself ragged to like do the best. I think it is okay to accept yourself how you are right now and appreciate yourself for how you are now, because you can never go back. I think this is really common with people, especially in high school, this with body image. For example, you might look back and you wasted all this time just thinking about all of your flaws and maybe trying to work out, maybe dieting in high school, and you're just like, looking back, you're like, why didn't I just love my body in high school? Because it was a great body and there was no reason for me to feel that way about it. I should have just focused on loving myself. It actually wasn't productive or helpful for me to just focus on my flaws. And of course there is a line with that. If you are like independently choosing to do some kind of a health journey or whatever, that's up to you. But I don't think that it's helpful. I mean, think of any other situation where you look back. You're never going to look back and be like, yeah, I'm so glad that I was so hard on myself. Unless you truly are making, a really big life change and whatever. But for the most part, we shouldn't be going through long periods of just going through ourselves with a fine-tooth comb. I don't think that that's really healthy. All right, so starting off with the first chapter, Something Else Will Make Me Happy. She starts out by talking about how she peed her pants on the trampoline because birth apparently is, in her words, like a rocket launch, and that it destroys everything on the way out. That was a crazy metaphor for me, and it really feels like with that kind of metaphor, she's trying to give us, like, see, I'm not perfect. I pee myself on the trampoline. I don't know. It just didn't come across quite as relatable as I think she probably intended it to be, because as you read the book, she does make a lot of effort to come across as relatable and say that she comes from this really hard background, and I think that all of that is true, but that doesn't mean that her life is relatable now, or that her self-help is relatable now, or that her peeing herself on a trampoline makes her like every other woman who is working full-time, trying to raise kids full-time, struggling with money, maybe like in a hard work, you know what I mean? It's just not the same comparison. But she does say things that I do agree with in this chapter, like that life isn't meant to be survived, it's meant to be lived, and she talks a lot about getting therapy throughout the entire book, and how therapy has changed her life. It's helped her work through childhood trauma. She believes in medication and mental illness, seeking help for your mental health, and so all of that I really appreciate, because that is a huge step forward when it comes to Christian self-help. That's not something that we would have always used to see. I think a lot of times Christian conservatives can have this opinion that maybe some people need medication and therapy, but like real Christians probably don't, because they're like so in the Lord that they're not focused on their mental illness issues, and that can be really harmful. And so I do like that Rachel Hollis right away does talk about therapy and all of that. She does also say, though, that if you're unhappy, that's on you, but then she does specify if you're dealing with a mental illness like depression, that's not at all what she's talking about. She's more talking about if you're unhappy or discontent in your life situation. I would agree with that to a degree. I would say if you're unhappy with your life situation, I wouldn't say that that's on you. I would say that it's up to you to make the changes to change that situation, and it might not be your fault that you're there, though. It might not be your fault that you've landed where you are. Something might have happened unforeseen. There might have been a death. There might be mental illness. And so I don't think it's always people's fault where they are, but I do think it is, yeah, it's up to you. You're the only one who can change your life. I don't love how she worded that, but it is, yeah, we are starting off strong, I guess, with the self-help. Her childhood was pretty traumatic. She said that her parents had a lot of yelling. They ultimately did divorce, and her older brother, unfortunately, did pass away. He committed suicide, and she was the one that found him. So that was something that really stuck with her, and she always knew that she wanted to be in a better life than the one that she was born into. She knew that it was up to her alone to change that, and I think that that's something that can be very relatable for kids, any kid who's grown up and wanted something different for their lives. And so she shares that she thought to herself when she was young, someday I'll get out of here and then I'll be happy. And she learned later on the kind of phrase, you know, wherever you go, there you are, that you bring your issues with you, and change of geography is just that. It's just changing your geography. I have mixed feelings about this as somebody that has changed their geography. I don't think that it always is just changing your geography. For me, when I moved, you know, it was about my independence, becoming an adult. I didn't like the climate, like the literal climate of the state that I was living in. It was too cold in the winters, and so I wanted to go somewhere a little bit warmer. I wanted to have better income opportunities, and it also gave me space to like make a whole new friend group, really figure out who I was, what I liked, what I believed, and it was a really good experience for me. But I do think if you're moving thinking, well, like, the people here just don't get me, and I have never done anything wrong, and whatever, like, your problems, who you are, the struggles that you have will likely still be the same in a new location. Again, I think it can be more than that. There's a reason why if people are struggling with addiction, they might encourage people to move, to get an entirely new group of friends, new resources, build a new life. So I do think that if you're intentional about your move and the reasons behind it and what you're leaving behind and whatever it may be, I think that it can be a really positive thing. She also shares in this chapter that surrounding herself with really really good people has also helped, and that knowing what makes her happy and then doing those things is really important. So I'm not going to go this in depth on every single chapter, but I start off with this one going in depth because I want to show you that it starts off very self-help. She does throw in some verses, but you're going, okay, she did have a hard childhood. Maybe there's a little bit of relatable things there. Some of her advice, I would say, is very progressive for Christianity, and I don't mind a self-help book read, so I didn't hate it at this point. Then line number 2, I'm going to kind of skim this, but it's all start tomorrow. Throughout this chapter, Rachel talks about being a good friend to yourself and not bailing on yourself, because if you always think, I'm going to do it tomorrow, I'm always going to push it off, if a friend did that to you, they would be considered a really flaky friend, and you might want to stop hanging out with them. You might not trust them as much. And so she kind of shares that she believes that the same thing will happen for you if you keep bailing on yourself, if you keep breaking promises to yourself. Once again, I think this can be helpful. I think that building up self-discipline, making commitments, and then keeping them, all of that can be important. And she also talks about how when you have these successes with yourself, it builds up that muscle memory in your brain so that you can continue to keep having those successes. Line number 3 is that I'm not good enough, and she talks about how she is a workaholic or a recovering one. It's a little odd to me because she does act like this is, like she's an actual addict, and I'm not trying to minimize workaholism, but she even writes into the book that she looked up the definition while she was writing this book, and that's how she knew that she had it. And I do think that it's important to go and get properly diagnosed or to get help if you're going to be writing or putting out content about mental health. When I talk about mental health, I talk about it definitely from my own experience, but I also would never speculate about my own diagnoses. I would go to a professional and make sure that I know what I'm talking about, that it's not something that you can just guess. I think that it can be helpful to start to look into stuff and maybe go, maybe this is what I'm dealing with, but I just wouldn't put public content out there until you have that confirmed from a professional. So her bringing up workaholism and comparing it to real addiction, it feels like, again, this kind of grab for her to be very relatable, and it makes me feel like she's a little bit less relatable because sure, workaholism is a real thing, but at the same time, it's also not really comparable to like being raised by an alcoholic parent, or if you've ever known somebody in addiction, like you probably would beg for them to be a workaholic instead. And so it's a really weird section, but whatever. So this is the section I'm not good enough. She also talks about how she has Bell's palsy, and that's made her really mortified about going out in public. She's had 2 instances of it kind of popping up, and then I guess the rest of the time she's pretty okay. And she believes that her illness was caused by stress of her workaholism, and that's what caused her to make the change. Line number 4 is I'm better than you, and this one is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to dig too much into this. She just talks about not believing that you're better than other people, not judging other people, and not assuming that you have all of the answers. I appreciate that, especially in a Christian conservative book, because I do think there is kind of this wave of people on both sides feeling like they have all the answers, and I think it's good to push against that and having more open dialogue. Line number 5 is loving him is enough for me. Her husband Dave treated her like absolute shit, and I was pretty upset when I read through the book and she continued this love story. He was 8 years older than her. She was like 19 and he was 27, and he totally strung her along, just was sleeping up with her. Later, he broke up with her during her first Bell's palsy incident. She even broke up with him because he just kept using her as a hookup, and then he showed up at her door the next day because she blocked him, and then they stayed together, and she's like, I don't want to, she tries to use those points later on to talk about how she didn't let a man treat her badly, and that's why she got the prince. It's the same man. It's the same man. Okay, it's the same man. I think that this book, it kind of doesn't, to me, the point falls flat because she still ends up marrying this man who she uses in all of the other sections. She talks about, like, when Dave reads this section about my early dating experience, which was him, by the way, she just reveals that at the end. He's gonna cry. He's gonna be so upset about how that man treated me. It was him. I don't think he's so upset about how he treated you, or he would have apologized already. It's very weird, and to say, like, I don't need his love and he's not all there is for me, and then to still marry him, once again, the point falls flat. She's acting like they have a great love story. They do not. And she even cries while she's writing the book over the lack of respect that she had for herself, and that this man Dave, her now husband, had for her, but she says that because she set a boundary, that's all why he changed. And it's insane to me. It's terrible advice for young women. The whole section, to me, almost just feels like she's trying to justify to herself that she stayed in the marriage. Line number 6 is that no is a final answer, and it basically means keep going no matter what, but I think that she doesn't do a very good job of explaining that this isn't something that can be used in, like, relationships. If someone doesn't want to date you, take the no. Take the no. If someone doesn't want to be your friend, take the no. If the job says we don't want to hire you, don't keep showing up at that job and begging them for a job, because you're going to get the police called on you. So I don't like that section either. And at this point, I was feeling a little bit confused, because I was like, okay, the first sections were pretty palatable. The first sections weren't problematic. The first sections, yeah, I don't know, I just didn't dislike them. But then we start getting into these and I go, okay, this isn't self-help anymore. Now this is very much memoir. But I love memoirs, so I was like, that's fine. This was like one of her first books, so it's just kind of poorly written, but I was like, we're going into memoir. That's fine. So line number 7 is you're bad at sex. And she says you can't be bad at sex while talking about how you need to make it a priority and making frequency a priority. And that she realized when their sex life suffered and she brought it up to her husband, it was actually her fault that they weren't having sex, because even though she always said yes, she wasn't excited enough about it, and so that's why he gave up on her. And so then she had to make other changes and, like, all of these rules around their sex life and how it would go, and now they apparently have an awesome sex life. It does not read like a feel-good story to me. I do appreciate kind of the message, which is that having good communication with your partner is great, and that if sex is important to you, then you should try to prioritize that with your partner. But she kind of gives it as like a blanket statement, prescribed, this is how your marriage should be. You should be having sex all the time, have sex every day for a month, just do it and see how it changes things for you. I see this all the time from Christian people who talk about sex like Girl Defined. And it's very odd to me. People like Morgan and Paul, for example, say how you have to still have sex even if you're angry at your spouse, because that's just like part of your duty to each other. It's weird, and I think it's really unhealthy, and I think maybe it's an oversight for her to not address some of these issues, but it's a pretty big oversight, and there's some pretty big glaring holes there. This whole section is just her talking about her sex life in her own marriage. There's really nothing to me that is like really worth taking as advice from it, and the whole section just kind of made me feel uncomfortable and weird. She does talk about how, like, ooh, a Christian publisher, I don't know how they're gonna feel about this, but I'm breaking the rules because I'm not like just a good girl, and it goes back into this trying to be relatable thing. I don't know. I don't love it. Just everything about her husband, Dave, I really don't like. Then line number 8 is, I don't know how to be a mom. She talks about how keeping yourself and your baby alive is what makes you a great mom. She'll say, oh, the laundry hasn't been done in 2 months. Is your baby alive and are you alive? Then you're doing great. And she lists a bunch of other things where it's like, no, maybe at that point, it doesn't mean that you're a bad mom, but it does maybe mean that you're a mom that needs help. You're a mom who needs to call in the troops to help you with the laundry, watch the baby for a little bit while you do it, whatever. Someone who needs support. This goes back to the positivity at the beginning where she just reaches out to moms and tells them they're doing great. I'm not trying to say that moms aren't doing great, but I am trying to say if a mom is reading a book like this for help and insight, she doesn't feel like she's doing great, or she knows that she's not doing great and she wants to change that. And I think that it is important to give people real help and real advice instead of just minimizing the experience of being like, no, you're rocking it, mama. They might not be, and that's okay too. It's okay to go through a period with your kids where you don't know what to do. You do need extra help. Then it goes into lie 9, which is, I'm not a good mom. I'm not going to even get into this. She says everyone is a good mom, essentially, and she does talk again about screaming at her kids or her husband, which is completely... I mean, she, like, throws it in once again, it seems like, to sound relatable and to sound like, yeah, like the mom next door. No, why are you screaming at your husband and your kids? To me, that is... I'm sorry, my eyebrow is really itching, you guys. Why are you screaming at everybody? I think it's super unhealthy. It's not normal. Screaming at your kids, however much you want to normal... Oh, I just get loud when I get mad. No. I don't care. It is emotional abuse. Stop screaming at your family members and learn how to regulate your emotions. It is a tantrum. And so I don't know why she normalizes it in this book, especially after, in chapters about people that are concerned that they're not being good parents. if you're screaming at your kids, that is something that needs to change, that you need to get help for. Lie number 10 is that I should be further along by now, and she talks about how God's timing is perfect. I'm not going to say much on this. I think this is one of those things where it's so nuanced. If you are behind on retirement, God's timing may not be perfect in this case, and you may need to like make a plan. And that doesn't mean that you're a bad person, and it doesn't mean that you're like behind and less than, but you are behind on retirement and you do need to be able to retire, so you should make a plan to do that. This book just lacks a lot of nuance that I think is pretty important in these topics. Then there's the lie that other people's kids are better. She says that this is not true. Other people's kids just behave better in public, maybe. Once again, I think this is a nuanced conversation. Yes, I don't think that you should be comparing your children to other people's children, but if your children aren't behaving appropriately in public, once again, that doesn't mean that you're a bad parent, especially depending on what's going on for your kids. It is something to take note of and work on. It might be true that other people's kids behave better in certain circumstances than your kids, and you know what I mean? Like, it just lacks a lot of nuance, and to say across the board, no, your kids are fine. Your kids might be having behavioral issues. They might be bullies. There might be issues that you actually need to work on with your kids, and just saying my kid is fine is not really going to cut it. And lie 12 is that I need to make myself smaller. The gist here is that you need to believe in yourself, and I would agree with that. It goes back to self-help instead of all of these weird anecdotes about her parenting, sex life, and dating life. Then lie 13 is I'm going to marry Matt Damon. She talks about wanting to buy a Louis Vuitton bag and coming up with a plan to do that, which was building this business and how to get there and blah, blah, blah. And she does talk about imagining it in a ton of detail and what your dream is. She tells you to write down your dream, imagine what that life looks like. And it really is just manifestation in a Christian perspective. And so I'm going to marry Matt Damon. The lie is that she's not going to marry him, but it's really weird because the whole chapter is just essentially on manifesting your dreams by like really envisioning it. Lie number 14 is where it got confusing again for me, which is I'm not a good writer. She talks about not reading the reviews, so to speak, and to not get caught up on other people's opinions. And I don't think that she's like holistically wrong here, but once again, it just lacks any nuance, because I do think that some people's opinions can really make a difference or are important or are right. And, you know, I've had comments too that disagree with how I view, and then they change my opinion because I'm like, yeah, actually that is a good point. Maybe I don't like how they delivered that, but maybe there is a seed of truth here that I need to look at. And so I'm not encouraging anyone to go on and start cyberbullying people, but I do think that it's okay to listen to other people's opinions in small degrees and depending on the context. Lie number 15 is I will never get past this. She talks about her trauma with discovering her brother's body and shares this as an anecdote that she's still here and thriving, and that she refuses to let her trauma have the last word. Once again, it just lacks a lot of nuance. It comes across as self-help, but like by somebody that definitely is just a normal person. Not everybody can just get past their trauma. I think, especially for people, you know, not with like little t trauma, like how people talk about it today, but if people have like significant trauma, you come from a war-torn country, you dealt with significant, you know, childhood abuse, whatever, you can have lasting, you know, changes to your brain from that. You can have mental health issues from that. And I don't think that saying you can just get past it because Rachel Hollis was able to get past it is necessarily true. Then lie 16 is I can't tell the truth. This whole section was weird to me too, because she just starts talking about her experience with wanting a daughter, and so they decided to adopt, and throughout that, they decided to do foster care, and then when those children's parents wanted custody of them back and were able to get custody back, they felt that they were lied to, because that basically the system was so jealous that they lied to them, making them think that they would be able to adopt this child and that they didn't. And this really upsets me, and I think it's really selfish, frankly, of Rachel. I totally get if you want to adopt and you have a child in your care that they are potentially going to be up for adoption, that being devastating to you. That being said, doing foster care, the ultimate goal is reunification with their birth family. And if your ultimate goal is not reunification, I think you can have an ultimate goal of reunification while being open to adopting when that becomes the case, but I think you have to go into it with reunification as the goal for it to be healthy for the kid. You're not just taking this kid in, and they talk about how they had to give their baby back to parents who didn't deserve them. Well, it turned out that the parent didn't even know, the dad who wanted them didn't even know that the kids had been born yet. He hadn't even been notified for the months that they had them. She basically just talks about how they were lied to, and they were used. And I think if you know anything about foster care, if you go through the foster care program to become a foster parent, they give you so many horror stories. You know exactly what you're getting into, and you know that there are, even CPS, their goal is reunification, and so if there is any way, shape, or form that those children can go back to their biological parents, they are going to, as they should. The whole section just really rubs me the wrong way, talking about their trauma rather than talking about, I don't know, the whole thing should have been about the kids, not about them and them not getting what they wanted at the end of the day. It was really bizarre, and they actually did have the opportunity to keep the kids longer because they might come up for adoption, but because they hadn't in like their 4-month period, they were like, never mind, because we don't want to do foster care, we just want to adopt, which valid, that's fine, but then why did you start out doing foster care? Because foster care does not mean you were going to be able to adopt that child. They act like the county lied to them, really rubs me the wrong way. This information is so available out there, and yeah, I just don't like the way that a lot of conservative Christians treat adoption or the adoption process, or the way that they will place themselves as victims in these circumstances. Lie number 17 is, I am defined by my weight. I agree with that. You're not defined by your weight. Lie number 18 is, I need a drink. This goes back into memoir self-help, where she kind of assumes that like everybody is an alcoholic. That's what it felt like to me. And she talks about, way before this, I was like, whoa, Rachel Hollis has a problem with drinking, because she nonstop is talking about drinking throughout this book, which again was weird to me as like a Christian publisher, Christian book. I don't have an issue with her drinking, but it did already flag to me, like, I need to look up after this if she has a drinking problem or is an alcoholic, because the amount that she's talking about drinking, like, sitting down every night with giving the baby a bottle and having a glass of wine. To me, I'm like, they already had like 3 boys at home, and now you're trying to adopt twin girls and you're drinking every single night. It just feels like a lot, and maybe like at that time they should not have been doing foster care. I know that's going to come across as judgmental, and if you have your 1 glass of wine a night and that works for you, I'm not necessarily against that, but I am against putting foster care kids back into situations where there is substance abuse. I do agree with the premise, though. You don't need to drink, you don't need to smoke weed, you don't need nicotine, you don't need to do that to survive. Line number 19 is that there's only one right way to be. I did like that she put this in, but it still does also assume that the only right way to live is to be a Christian. And so it's more about being open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brain falls out, which I don't necessarily agree with either, because I do wish that they could kind of extend this to other religions, other forms of belief, and give everybody that same kind of understanding and love and compassion. Line number 20 is, I need a hero. It's really weird because they talk about how we always want someone else to save us, but we can only save ourselves. But then they also go into how actually Jesus is the only one who can save you, and it's a false belief that you can save yourself. And so that whole chapter felt very much like a Bible study, and it felt like the lie being I need a hero really wasn't a lie in their opinion, because we do need a hero, we need a savior, which is Jesus in their perspective. Yeah, I don't know. This was kind of an interesting read to me. I would love, your thoughts if you guys have read this book, especially if you've read this book with a Christian perspective in mind. What were your thoughts? Because even as someone that's secular, that doesn't have the same standards for like Christian writing, it was kind of jarring. Some of the sexual descriptions just, I'm fine with it being in there if it's for a reason, but it didn't really feel like it was for a reason. It really felt like she was trying to convince herself that her relationship with her husband is normal and that her sex life is normal. It felt like an overshare. It didn't feel like I'm breaking stigmas and like opening up this conversation. Let me know if that makes sense to you guys. Overall, I guess my summary is kind of, it just felt very disjointed. Let me know what you guys think. Did you think that it flowed well? Because to me, it felt like they just tried to come up with 20 lies, and she started to run out of things that could be religious after the first, little bit. And after that, she just did very anecdotal, memoir type content or self-help type content that didn't require any sort of research and is really just her opinion. I don't know. It just was not what I thought it was going to be. I've seen this book posted on a million stories of girls that I used to go to church with and people saying that it's great. But I think the book really can be summed up with like, don't believe lies about yourself, which again, these lies that she's believing about herself, it reads like a memoir. These aren't just like lies that everyone is going to believe about themselves. Anyway, I know this was a little bit rambly. I've been doing more book content, honestly, you guys, because doing some of the other deep dives, it's a lot to do the research and my brain is just kind of fried. And so this helps me to learn, to know what's out there, to know what the other side of, the other point of view is. Or I'll also be reading books like, I did one on Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Kobes-Dumais, which is incredible. I read books that I agree with too, but I want to give you guys some of these books to help show you what the other side thinks, why they believe what they do, what I disagree with now as a secular person. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I love hearing your opinions. If you want to support but you don't know what to say, you can always comment a white bird or a dove because that is my logo down below. Hit share and copy link. You don't have to send it anywhere, I promise. And please subscribe to my channel or double check to make sure that you are subscribed if you're not already. If you have any ideas for things that I should do videos on in the future or books that you'd like me to cover, please do comment it, down below because I really do have an actual physical list. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it and I will see you in the next one.